is that he had a different vision of the yeshiva that we all benefit from till today. Until Rabbi Meir Shapiro, yeshiva was a more formalized base medrash. Rabbi Meir Shapiro said no, to return the respect to the yeshiva movement, to return the Hachzar Torah L'Yoshna, that a yeshiva has to be someplace that a yeshiva movement is proud to be a part of, that it's the most beautiful building in the town, that it's a campus. He was a real visionary, forward-thinking individual, ahead of his time, and a lot of things would surprise us that was ahead of his time because we take it for granted today. But he was the first person to think of a lot of these things. And he saw university campuses at his time, and he said, the yeshiva has to have that full experience. It should have a yard in front of the yeshiva that during his time they could walk around and talk and learn. And they should feel it's their home. They should have a dormitory, the first place to have a dormitory on campus, a dining room downstairs, a mikveh, which is definitely the first in history. He even had a custom named Henneth Weinstein, who built a model of a Beis HaMikdash, a real full-size model and not full-size, a real nice model, and Rabbi had bring it here in the downstairs room so that the Talmidim were learning Kutch and they would be able to utilize the actual model of Beis HaMikdash to learn. He had an Eitzer, again a huge Eitzer, thousands of Sfarim, which were lost or destroyed by the Nazis. Tens of thousands of Sfarim, which were very rare, it was very expensive to be able to produce such an Eitzer in those days. It wasn't Eitzer HaChachma, it wasn't Hebrew books, it was an actual, real Sfarim Eitzer. He had this vision of what the yeshiva should be, and shir rooms, and the chabur rooms, and this whole package deal. He was very, very, very much a visionary, brilliant and charismatic, understood the power of the media. When he was fundraising for the place, he laid the cornerstone laying, he invited the Polish press to come cover the event. The Polish Yeshiva had no thought of doing such a thing. This generated publicity that people hear about it and donate money for the yeshiva. He never had children. He and his wife were in Malka. She's very morsel. He didn't have a chance to go to her carrier yesterday either. They never had children, unfortunately. Rabbi Shapiro passed away at a very young age. He was 46 years old. In fact, he bought a life insurance policy. He was a young, healthy man with no children. And it didn't make sense that he should have bought a life insurance policy. And he made the yeshiva his beneficiary.
The story behind the life insurance policy is actually, it has American roots. Prudential, which we all know in America now, was trying to get into the Polish market. And they figured that the best way for them to advertise themselves was to get a famous Polish Jewish figure to buy a large policy. So they came to Rabbi Meir Shapiro, and what Rabbi Meir Shapiro did was, it was an insurance here, he did almost a reverse insurance policy where they gave him the money up front and he would pay it back as a loan, right? It's called a reverse policy in essence. And so he said when he died young, right, the yeshiva had tremendous debts from the building. The yeshiva at least was paid off. The debts of the actual building, the yeshiva still had operating costs, which they struggled with. A couple of other things about, just adding on to what you said. Chachmei Lublin is the only yeshiva in the world, I think still today, maybe Torah Chaim in Yerushalayim has this service where you would actually leave your laundry right outside your room every day, and somebody would pick it up and you would have freshly laundered clothes the following day brought to you. Something that I'm not sure how long that lasted, but every day in the basement, the catacombs of the yeshiva, there was a large laundry system, and literally that night you never returned because, as we know, the Buffalo came there, they were poor. They first were outfitted in nice clothing. And Meir Shapiro, in addition to raising a lot of money, he built relationships with some of the biggest manufacturers in the country. The bricks of the yeshiva were donated by somebody from Lublin, a wealthy Jew. The trees that you mentioned in the garden were actually donated by a baroness. He referred to her as a princess. I think it was just a wealthy woman who saw the building that was going up and figured it would be nice if they had these beautiful trees that would surround the campus. You see the famous picture, I don't know if it's in here, you see that there were beautiful trees that surrounded the entire area. Part of the motivation for Meir Shapiro, this is very interesting, and he spoke about this often, was that he grew up in a wealthy family. He married wealth, and he did not have personal and financial issues. Obviously, he had no children. He didn't have many expenses. And to him, watching somebody starve and somebody learn Torah and live inside a shul as and scrounging around for food and eating tag, going to different people and having starved essential meals and making them feel like beggars, he could not even relate to such a concept. And much of that was due to the fact that he did grow up wealthy. So for him, they said if somebody, was living already on a lower level, so he says, okay, everybody else, them, okay, 2 slices of bread, they have 1 slice of bread, you'll make it. But he would say that I grew up and I saw, I had what I needed, so why shouldn't the B'nai Torah, who are princes of Klal Yisrael, have what they need? Now, as I started speaking about on the bus, a lot of his motivation for starting this yeshiva was for the Hasidic world to have its mir, to have its slabotka, to take the top bachrim from all across Poland and Hungary. There were actually a couple of Germans, a couple of Lithuanians that came here, but that was not a common occurrence. Maybe we once looked at the names. Were those? One well-known Lithuanian that came here didn't last very long. Was the yeshivas Hanhagas were combined between Chassidisha Avoda and proper yeshiva. There was a mashgiach, as in the mashgiachim, as in the yeshivas in the Litvish yeshivas. But at the same time, he would let the bachrim go for Yom Tovim to the Rebbes. He brought many of the Rebbes here. The Rebbe's role model, the Rebbe's father figure, was the Chachmei Rebbe, who was seen as the Nasi of the yeshiva. Famous picture when he came and he opened the doors to the yeshiva. And the whole idea of the yeshiva was for this to be this elite yeshiva. Now, he hatched this idea in the early 20s. And he quickly realized that raising the money in Eastern Europe was just not going to be a possibility, even with getting the timber donated, the bricks donated. The famous story with a fellow named Eichbaum who's a close friend of Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who donated the land to the yeshiva, and the legend goes that his wife took him to the entire, but she said that part of it belongs to me, so I also want the schus in donating the land to Rabbi Meir Shapiro. But at the end of the day, this project was so massive that it was very, very difficult to get it all done. So in 1924, first he traveled to Eastern Europe. Now, just to go back a second, we know about Rabbi Meir Shapiro a couple of things, but he was famous for being a Polish parliamentarian. He was not one of the founders of Agudas Yisrael, but one of the driving forces of Agudas Yisrael. And at the time when he made his first appearance at the Yeshiva Geberer at that time, and everyone knows the famous story of Daf Yomi. It goes a couple of different ways, but they say that the Chafetz Chaim told him to come in a few minutes late, and when he walked in, he stood up. The Chafetz Chaim stood up, and everyone stood up, and he made a big rash, and that's how they got this attention towards this young Rosh Yeshiva. Normally, this baby would have been ignored, and the Ger Rebbe, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, making the clap in the bima and starting the first daf. But I'll let Yehuda talk more about the Daf Yomi, or Heshem can talk about it. But his ideas were so revolutionary at the time that even when he came to America and he pitched this great Polish university of higher Talmudic study, it didn't really get much interest, at least at the start. And he had to utilize his position as a Polish parliamentarian. There are many witticisms that are attributed to Rabbi Meir Shapiro. Some maybe he said, some maybe he didn't, but they all, they don't say these about me and you. He says that he went to fundraise in England, and he said that in England he is able to raise, that back in Poland as a parliamentarian, he's able to ride the trains free. He said, so too, when I'm in England, I'm also able to ride the trains free. And he meant something else. The famous story of him going to Germany, when he describes Hanhagas and the Kehila in Germany, he talks about how they sell, his first experience, he's working with a broiler in Frankfurt, and he's selling the ice cream, and he says this, explains the ice cream, the coldness of the Yekib community, to towards him, but it happens to be a broider was helpful. There was another family, actually it's a pretty well-known family, the Halberstadt family, who helped him. They paid him $1,000 to come for Shabbos. They heard his Torah, they heard him sing, and they begged him to stay for another Shabbos. And he gave another $1,000. And he made waves not only in Poland, but which was kind of rare. He made waves in Hungary at the time. And the Polish yeshiva system was discombobulated because of all the different Hasidices and the factions and the disorganization. The Hungarian yeshiva system was just totally a free-for-all. It was just some people, some towns, people would come and learn, and some of the Zaydiyah learned in the Yeshiva in Hungary. It was, I wouldn't say it was easy. Later on, there were a couple of proper yeshivas maybe in Hungary, but for the most part, it was a shul, and you would show up, your father would send you with a couple of pieces of bread, and you get on a train. Recently, I was in Los Angeles, and I met Dovi Safier great uncle. What was his name, Dovi? Amram, and I spoke to him. I should show you guys the video afterwards. And he actually, his father sent him to learn in one of these yeshivas, and he showed up, and he was no longer there. It was due most of the war that they had fled, but these yeshivas were so not on the map that you could not, one day they could just totally disappear. The way the yeshiva Bachrim were treated at the time and the system of teaching was really not something that today we'd be proud of. I saw one story which particularly bothered me, and it's credit to today's chinuch. You can see how far we've come, and people can relate to this. He talks about how the discipline in these yeshivas were so severe. Besides the beatings, which maybe our past generations could relate to being beaten by the rebbeim, just the embarrassment that was caused to Talmidim that did things that weren't proper. It says, in Hungarian yeshivas, the story is recounted about some boys caught playing cards during Hanukkah in blank yeshiva. The Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe, found the boys and expelled them. After they begged to be readmitted to the yeshiva, he allowed them to return on one condition, that they donate money to purchase a new parochus, on which was to be embroidered the words, the Kaparas Avonos. The same author provides an account of another rabbi who assisted in a high level of discipline in his yeshiva, making sure that the students wrote regular letters to their parents. When a bacher needed reprimanding, he was called into the Rebbe's office. The Rebbe silently paced up and down the room for some time, sometimes for hours, playing psychological games with the boy, after which the bacher was free to go, not knowing what the actual punishment was for some time. Interestingly, an aside, that there's not that much connection, but he talks about the idea of playing cards, and how playing cards was considered a trade back then, very much so, that in more medieval Poland, there was a big ban on playing cards. And even women who were caught playing cards, her name was announced Shabbos in the local shul, somebody would say. But there was one heter to play cards, and that was in the few months following later. If you had given birth, you were allowed, the woman was allowed to play cards. So they say that the wealthy women in town would pay the women who had babies to come to their card games so they'd be able to play cards. Rabbi Meir Shapiro, after he started his yeshiva, he was criticized by many, and he says, "But how can somebody like you? How can you have this yeshiva? You're so young." So he says, "I promise that every single day I'll work on it." There were other criticisms of yeshiva. Some people said, and Chachmei Lublin was not a yeshiva, he got smicha. And someone said that you're advertising this yeshiva as this great yeshiva. People are going to leave the yeshiva, and no one's going to know to what level they progress. Originally, we all know, famously, the yeshiva had started that every bacher who came had to know 200 block, the Balpeh. There obviously were not that many bacherim in all of Europe that could do that, so it didn't last very long. You had the three very, very famous Talmidim of Chachmei Lublin, Rabbi Meir Shapiro, you had Chaim Kreisberg, and Illinois was like that. David had him in his house many times, and knew, they say he could have passed the pin test. He knew color, by heart, he knew everything. And he knew, the third famous one, obviously another great genius was the Persian of Montreal. So the complaint was that the boys would leave up and leave his yeshiva, and they would go out for the rabbinate, and nobody would actually know whether they would get sent somewhere else. So,
presumably they're in their 20s and 30s when they were killed. The yeshiva only lasted 9 years.
So the yeshiva.
Learned by Rabbi Meir, like that was the attraction, or?
Rabbi Meir Shapiro only left. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin for less than 3 years, and during the yeshiva started around being the 1930, end of 29, and during the time that Rabbi Meir Shapiro was the Rosh Yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin, he was fundraising a lot of the time elsewhere. So you can't imagine that he said that many shiurim in his building. Now. It was. Later on, so actually this is very interesting, but after Meir Shapiro was nifter, trying to find new Rosh Yeshiva was a tremendous challenge. And some of the names of people that were tried getting to be the Rosh Yeshiva were Menachem Zemba, Shach was another famous letter written when they asked him, Shach, you could come here. Varsity, and ultimately the famed final Rosh Yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin is somebody who was thanks to Sruli Bortzi was making listen to that Gemini, she was making a very, very big comeback today. Is the Kajik Love Gain, who's very from and his but to be fully transparent, the yeshiva did not ever retain the glory it had in its early days under Rabbi Meir Shapiro. It suffered financially, wasn't able to provide the same system, the same high level of Gashmis and the same high level of Ruchnis, although it certainly, you would say, is probably the top Chassidic yeshiva. So back to my point that I was middle of, so what we would call a minor league Chassidic Rebbe once approached Meir and said, you have all these Bukhrim, they're coming to learn the yeshiva, and they're leaving the yeshiva, and they're going to come out, and they're going to think that they're these, each one is a great group. So he said, listen, he says, the Baal Shem Tov knew that one day there would come a day when there would be Rebbes whose only qualification was that their father was a Rebbe. Nevertheless, he established a Chassidic movement. He left it with that. But there are really, I would say that what was very interesting, you mentioned it, is that Meir Shapiro was a master of the press, especially the Polish press, and even those who were negative or anti-yeshivas, anti-Yiddishkeit, were, they were enamored with this whole idea. It's incredible. It was one of the crowns of Poland, this building, nothing like this had ever been built before, and everybody was glued to this whole thing as it went on, and the opening of the yeshiva attracted, probably, as they say, the Yiddish papers were 100,000 people, so it was probably like 25 or 30,000 people that came here for the opening of the yeshiva. There's famous pictures of the courtyard line, and Yehuda can tell you all the stories of that day. We'll add a couple more stories in the cemetery, but one example you'll see that we're going to go visit the cemetery, which is right here. On one side of the yeshiva flank, and the other side was the Jewish hospital in Lublin. Rabbi Meir Shapiro would say that the yeshiva is the antidote from getting from the hospital to the cemetery. When Rabbi Meir Shapiro embarked upon his campaign, was trying to finish it was during the Great Depression, and the world was in terrible financial shape, and people were losing jobs, and there were many other meisters, many other people competing for the same dollars as there is today. And he was once asked about that in the press, and I think the newspaper was called Unser Express, and in there you see he gives this example, and he says the story of a chicken coop. One day a farmer brings a goose into the chicken coop, and as we all know, geese eat a lot more than the chickens, and the chickens are very distraught, saying, you're going to get a certain amount of food a day, you can eat half of it, the rest of us are going to starve. He says, no, you don't understand. He says, in the morning, the farmer is going to come and he's going to bring the food, and you're all going to go chirp, 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 and I am going to make the loudest noises you've ever heard. And ultimately, we're going to get so much food that it's going to feed everyone. And he said it's the same way with fundraising, and I believe that I used this example to a couple of people when we started fundraising for our shul. Everyone said that there's so many local campaigns, so many local places that are going to suffer as a result of all of us writing out these big checks to the shul. And sure enough, I think we've done okay, and we've continued to help all the local places. I'll finish by just talking about the end of the yeshiva, and it's very emotional when the Talmidim in the yeshiva, and those who write about it, Hillel Zayman writes about it, some of the other famous people who survived the war and wrote about the end of the city of Lublin. We'll hear more about it when we go to Adana. But he talks about what happened to the Safier and Yeshiva. And as we know, the Nazis initially had planned to build it. I mean, they planned on building this tremendous museum to the extant Jewish people. And it was going to be in Prague, and they were taking all these art, all these Safier, all these treasures from different places, and they're bringing them. And for some reason, the library of Chachmei Lublin, something else that's just interesting about the library of Chachmei Lublin is Rabbi Meir Shapiro saw that Yiddishkeit in Poland was falling. And he realized that there were so many Jews in Poland that had tremendous farm collections, these children would never utilize them, and they would end up in the trash. So he actually had a couple of agents that traveled the country and got a hold of these incredible farm collections. Matt Lewin, the lawyer in Washington, has some of these farms somehow. Those are the ones that were saved, and he got a hold of these farms. But when we talk about at the end of the very end, and what happened with the Safier, the Nazis took the Safier and they went into the central heating system, basically the Yeshiva, and they put the Safier into the fire. And it was in fire, and you see these people describe the smoke, which was reaching Shemayim, was reminiscent of the Beis Hamikdash burning. And eventually, they had put so many Safier, it got clogged up, and it no longer was just, it was worth it. They couldn't put so many Safier, 27,000 or 29,000 Safier, that had filled the shul, that filled the library, they couldn't do it anymore. So we actually have an eyewitness later on from Nazi who wrote, "We threw the large library out of the building and carried the books together to the marketplace, where we set them on fire. The fire lasted 20 hours to burn all these books. The Jews who remained in the city gathered around and wept bitterly. We summoned the military band and the triumphant cries of the soldiers drowned out the noise of the wailing Jews."